Hello, my name's Cliff Stevenson and I'm the Helpful Economist. The poor are really suffering from the UK's inflation policies. In the UK, the main tool to control inflation is to increase the interest rates. And rates have been going up substantially and are expected to continue increasing for the foreseeable future. At the same time, increasing interest rates works by squeezing less wealthy people. They're bearing all of the cost of this inflation policy while the rich are not making any contribution at all to the inflation effort. I don't understand why we don't hear more people talking about this. So let's look at this issue a bit more closely. So why do the Bank of England use interest rates almost exclusively to control inflation? I think it's useful to set out the rationale of what the Bank of England believes and what happens when they increase the interest rate. So in economics, this is called the transmission mechanism, the way in which an increase in interest rate is transmitted through to prices. And a higher interest rate it makes it more expensive for people to borrow money, and at the same time it encourages people to save. So overall, the idea is that means that people will spend less. And then if people spend less on goods and services, the price of those things will tend to rise more slowly. So inflation, the increase in prices, will be reduced. But reduced spending means lower sales for business. So although this does have a downward effect on prices, lower sales have other impacts, not least that it reduces jobs. And ultimately, the truth is that we might need a recession to stop prices rising. Now, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has explicitly said that he is comfortable with this, and the Bank of England chief economist has called inflation a wicked problem. So in effect, the Bank of England objectives to reduce inflation are that this is their role at any cost. But let's look a little bit closer at this cost. Who is actually affected by an increase in interest rates? Well, the people who are affected are those who hold debt, mortgage holders, people who've got credit card debt, people who are buying things with financing, which is basically people with low to middle incomes. If we look at this debt to wealth graph, which looks at debt in relation to the total assets and savings by each decile of the population, we can see why the least wealthy are really hit severely by interest rates. For the least wealthy, 10%, debt is it's 300% of their wealth. So the interest rate absolutely hammers the poorest 10%. Even looking at, say, the third and fourth decile in terms of wealth, they have 40 to 50% debt levels in relation to their wealth. So any increase in interest rates is going to have a big impact on their cost of living and ultimately on their spending. Of course, this is the goal. This is why the policy is seen to work. However, when we look at the low debt to wealth, the people with low debt to wealth, we see that the transmission mechanism breaks down. For the 7th to 8th decile, they only have 8 to 12% debt to wealth. So the impact of increased interest rates on their kind of disposable spending funds is much lower than for those on that have lower wealth. The truth is that the most wealthy are not hit at all by interest rates. For the top 30% by wealth, debt is 8% or less of their wealth. So an interest rate increase, even a very big one, has no impact on their spending. So because those with high levels of debt in relation to their wealth are significantly affected, all of the decrease in demand needs to come from them. And so in order to reduce demand sufficiently to reduce prices, we have to hit those affected by interest rates hard. Now, this is strong language, but this is really choking the least wealthy and letting the rich off scot-free. I'd argue that this is wicked. The idea that inflation must be reduced at any cost is flawed for me. This impact on the less wealthy is too high a cost to bear. And in fact, it makes inflation worse for those living on credit, and an interest rate increase makes buying things more expensive. So actually, in the immediate future, inflation is made worse by hitting the poor so much. So what are the alternatives? Well, when I was doing my postgraduate economic studies in the 1980s, we had a new economic orthodoxy emerging from the Chicago School of Milton Friedman, and the idea of the primacy of monetary policy, that really only monetary policy is required to control inflation. And we've had decades of relatively low inflation, which the orthodoxy has taken on board the idea that, this view of interest rates being the only tool required to control inflation is really accepted and not questioned. But the truth is that the decades of low inflation are actually not definitive evidence that all you need to control inflation is monetary policy and the interest rate. And I think that it's time to start questioning this and looking at other possibilities. There is actually another major policy tool that is very rarely mentioned. It's just not fashionable given the orthodoxy, because the truth is that fiscal policy can be used to control inflation. So inflation can be reduced by the government increasing taxes or reducing spending. And these are both legitimate policy tools, which I think the time has come to consider using fiscal policy to control inflation. I don't think we can reduce public spending because it's already in crisis, and I think we have a need to increase taxes. I'm going to make a new video on this shortly. But there are possibilities to increase tax, in my view, and not necessarily income tax. I think there's other interesting taxes that we need to at least explore, like land tax, wealth tax, looking at the way inheritance tax works. Also, I think there's possibilities to increase VAT. We could increase VAT on luxury products, which would not affect people buying basic commodities, but it would have a much quicker effect on the spending of those with low debt to wealth ratios. Now, of course, people would complain increased taxes or VAT would be painful for people, but compared to the wickedness of this disproportionate effect of Bank of England policies on the least wealthy, it's definitely worth considering. So in conclusion, interest rates can only control inflation by creating a slowdown. And it's the least wealthy that are particularly hit. Any alternative is definitely going to be painful, increasing taxes or VAT. But I think that policies that hit the wealthy more would both be more equitable and more efficient in quickly affecting spending behaviour to relieve price pressure. I hope you found this information useful. My name's Cliff Stevenson. I'm the Helpful Economist. See you next time.